Okay, welcome back from your break. This is Dr. Matthew J. Trom. We are in the home stretch of the intellectual property patents for engineers presentation, asynchronous presentation in 4501. And just a quick disclaimer, if this happens to be the first video that you've clicked on in this series, I am not a lawyer. This lecture is educational. It's not meant to be legal advice. And please, before you make any binding legal decisions, consult with a bona fide lawyer before you proceed with anything that would ultimately be binding from a legal perspective. Okay, so with those disclosures out of the way, we are talking about patent infringement and preserving patent rights, and we are down here in this bullet talking about first to file versus first to invent versus first to disclose, which of course, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, the previous segment, in 2013, the U.S. changed from a first to invent system to a first to disclose system, which in a lot of ways is less complicated, but also you just have to sort of be aware that if you now publicly disclose something, that you've got a year in order to file a patent before it's considered to be passed into the public domain. We had talked previously about this example, and now I was going to just walk through this second example, which I call example 2 of first to disclose. But in this example, I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm going to let you guys. I'm going to let you guys kind of work through this. So what I've done between example 1 and example 2 is I've just switched the date of conception. So in example 2, inventor B conceives the invention on February 2nd. Inventor A conceives it on February 6th. Inventor A publicly discloses on the 9th. Inventor B files a patent on the 13th. And inventor A files a patent on the 16th. Now remember, under the FTD system, first to disclose system in the previous example, inventor A, who disclosed on the 9th, would ultimately get the patent even though inventor B filed a patent first. What happens with respect to FTD for example 2? So I'll let you guys sort that out. And once you've got that figured out, then think about what happens under an FTI system. And ultimately, think about what happens under an FTF system. The answers turn out to be different depending on which system you are under. So probably a good sort of exercise to walk through those to make sure you truly understand the difference between FTD, FTI, and FTF. Okay. You guys think about that. We can talk about the answer in class. Let's move on to the war story that I promised at the beginning of the sequence. Okay, so you guys know, especially with respect to intellectual property, that I have seen and done a lot of things, made a ton of mistakes, and like to sort of share with you guys the things that I've seen to give you a sense of, sort of like what not to do in some cases. But this one is really, really interesting because this is an example of something where a company that I was working with successfully received a patent for an invention that, depending on how you look at it, might have already been patented. So this just sort of goes to show you that if you have really good lawyers and a lot of money, that you can basically patent anything. Whether you can defend it or not in a court of law is a different story, but you can kind of schmooze USPTO to grant a patent really for almost anything. So the company that I was working with was called Solar Logic, and they had a hedgehog concept. If you have talked or gone through the hedgehog concept asynchronous presentation, you know what it is that I'm talking about. Hedgehog concepts come out of Jim Collins' Good to Great book about why some companies make the leap and others don't from being good companies to great companies, published in 2001. You'll see that in a different presentation. But here was their hedgehog concept. So among CSP competitors, CSP is concentrated solar power competitors, only Solar Logic provides a complete turnkey solar-fired Rankine cycle power system. And then there were 5 key attributes that differentiated Solar Logic from its competitors. So they were a distributed power generation system. Their fuel was solar energy, so basically free. They miniaturized a Rankine cycle down to something small enough that it could fit on the back of a truck or on the top of a commercial or industrial building. They used concentrated solar power to increase the thermodynamic efficiency of that small Rankine cycle, and they used a disk turbine for energy extraction because they were having to deal with two-phase flow. Here is a very, very young version of me standing next to Greg Bull, who was the president of Solar Logic. Here is their turbine operating under live steam. Here's a FLIR image of kind of the heat coming off of the turbine. And then the thing that I helped them with was the design of a parabolic trough boiler simulator, right? So ultimately, they were using parabolic concentrators to heat up water and then later an organic working fluid and run that fluid through a Rankine cycle. But they didn't want to be beholden in sort of the initial test phases to the whims of the weather and the sun. And so we built a solar simulator that basically simulates the function of the parabolic troughs without the need for sunlight, right? Basically, just using electricity to heat up these pipes that are simulated in simulating what goes on in the trough. So the interesting thing when you're dealing with concentrated solar power for Rankine power cycles is you're definitely in a two-phase flow working fluid world, because you have to deal with pure liquid and pure vapor, but also two-phase mixtures, right, where you've got both liquid and vapor. And that, as we'll see in a second, is potentially problematic for Rankine power cycles. But here is the embodiment of their power plant. So they've got their parabolic solar concentrators, which again collect the sunlight over this large cross-sectional area and then concentrate the sunlight onto these tubes that carry water or some other working fluid through them. And that's the boiler. And so we've got the boiler here, and then we've got the turbine. So the working fluid goes from the boiler into the turbine, where it's expanded over the turbine and used to produce energy. Then it goes from the turbine to the condenser. So you guys should know this from thermo. This is a Rankine cycle where it's condensed back to liquid water, and then it's pumped back up to high pressure and put back into the boiler to complete this closed loop cycle. So here's the cycle itself, and then here are the various components of the cycle that Solar Logic built and tested as it was sort of moving ahead in this world of concentrated solar power for energy generation. Now, in a conventional Rankine power cycle, you guys hopefully remember that process 2 to 3, which is the expansion through the turbine, must stop when the working fluid reaches saturated vapor, right? Quality of 1. If it goes below a quality of 1, what ends up happening? Well, you end up getting droplets of water that are now blasting through your turbine at really, really high speeds and destroying the turbine blades, right? So here's an image of turbine blades that had some liquid or some particulate that got into the turbine and ended up scalloping and destroying those blades. So they're no longer able to produce power when they've got all kinds of damage like this. And so in a conventional Rankine cycle, you need to be very careful again not to let state 3 go below the dome into the two-phase mixture, right? Because then you get liquid water droplets that cause that. However, if you could come up with a way to get the Rankine power cycle to operate with state 3 being inside the dome, what you're effectively doing is increasing the size of the TS diagram, which corresponds to a greater work output from the turbine, which ultimately means more power per cycle. So a cycle more energy per cycle, which means more power overall can be generated for a cycle that operates in the dome rather than one that stops the turbine expansion process right at quality equals 1. So this is sort of an exciting goal, except in conventional turbines, that's what happens. And so you sort of want to avoid this. But Solar Logic came up with a solution, which is instead of using a conventional aero-derived turbine like this one, they used a disc turbine, a bladeless turbine. And they filed and successfully were awarded a patent for that bladeless turbine. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that in 1913, Nikola Tesla also filed a patent, and the patent was awarded for kind of the same thing, right? So here's the verbiage of Tesla's original 1913 turbine patent, which of course expired in 1933 and passed into the public domain. And then here's the verbiage from SolarLogic's 2015 bladeless turbine patent. And you can look these up, right? I actually give you the U.S. patent number, so you can look them up and read them in their entirety. I am sort of paraphrasing here because both patents are quite long. But what I've tried to do is sort of color code the Tesla's 1913 disclosure with SolarLogic's 2015 disclosure to show you that there are an awful lot of things that are similar, right? So Tesla claims a machine adapted to be propelled by fluid consisting in the combination with a casing having inlet and outlet ports at the peripheral and center ports, respectively, of a rotor having plane space surfaces between which the fluid may flow in natural spirals by the adhesive and viscous action, imparting its energy of movement to the rotor. A machine adapted to be propelled by fluid, comprising in combination a runner composed of a plurality of discs having plane surfaces and mounted at intervals in the central shaft, and formed with openings near the centers and means of admitting the propelling fluid into spaces between the discs at the periphery and discharging it at the center of the same. Now, that's very convoluted and complicated, but if you look at the color coding, look at what SolarLogic has claimed. They say a bladeless turbine comprising a main housing, a cover, and a center line, right? Just like Tesla's disclosure. 3 or more turbine blades disposed within the case, right? So we have a plurality of discs having plane surfaces, right? So same as Tesla, wherein each turbine disc has a center opening, right? Remember, we have openings near the center, means of admitting propelling fluid, and 2 or more of the discs have a set of exhaust ports positioned annually around the center opening, right? As Tesla said, discharging, this is the working fluid we're talking about, discharging at the center of the same. SolarLogic's patent goes on to claim a drive shaft passing through the center opening of 3 or more of the turbine discs and attached to 3 or more of the discs. Tesla says a runner that's mounted at intervals on a central shaft. SolarLogic says 1 or more fluid vapor inlets attached to the main housing such that fluid vapor is directed at a specified angle onto the discs. Tesla says opening near the centers and means of admitting and propelling fluid into the spaces between the discs at the periphery. SolarLogic says a set of exhaust holes proximate to and center connected to the fluid vapor outlet that are positioned annually around the drive shaft. Right? Tesla says discharging at the center of the same, and by the same he's talking about the central drive shaft. And then SolarLogic says wherein the fluid vapor causes turbine discs to rotate, and Tesla's a bit more clear about this. Fluid may flow in natural spirals by adhesive viscous action, imparting energy of movement to the rotor, right? So at least looking at these excerpts, right? These are not, again, the entirety of the patents, but at least looking at these excerpts, what SolarLogic is claiming in 2015 is pretty darn close to what Tesla claimed in 1913, and yet USPTO granted SolarLogic their patent in 2015. You could see here the actual images, the figures taken from Tesla's Tesla's 1913 turbine patent and SolarLogic's 2015 turbine patent. Very similar, right? We have a disc. It has holes that allow the fluid to sort of enter and leave. It's built into this housing. It's got a central shaft that runs through the middle, right? You can see here there's a casing that has a hole for the shaft. So there's a lot of similarities here between the Tesla patent and SolarLogic's patent. However, USPTO accepted this as its own separate standalone patent, even though the Tesla turbine patent was very similar and expired in 1933. So this is just, I amazed when this happened, right? Because from at least my reading of it, those two are quite similar. But again, USPTO, depending on how good your lawyers are and how much money you have and how much you kind of continue to work through the process, sometimes can be compelled to grant patents for things that might seem as if they already exist. Now, the great innovation, the reason that I think that Solar Logic should have received the patent is because they also were claiming, using this bladeless turbine for energy generation, for energy derived from solar power, which was not in Tesla's original claims. But again, just surprising how closely the Solar Logic patent and the Tesla patent's claims sort of overlap with each other, at least in terms of the initial claims at the beginning of both patent applications. So just wanted to share that with you, just to let you know that even if you go out into the literature and you find that something is patented, don't give up, right? It's always possible to find kind of neat, tricky ways around patent law and convince USPTO to, and give you a patent, even if something seems to already exist in the public domain, if you could find a clever way to write the claims in such a way that you create some sort of new or novel application, the way that Solar Logic did by adding the ability for, renewable solar energy generation on top of kind of the existing technology that came out of Tesla's patents. So, okay. That is the end of my Patents for Engineers presentation slide deck. Thanks for sticking around and look forward to seeing you guys in class. Bye.